So this evening we've partnered with the Interaction Design Association to present a panel discussion on what design brings to business, which seems to be a very flourishing area of activity. And we've invited Independent Strategy Director Michelle Tabet to lead the panel discussion. Now, Michelle is a part of a network of independent designers, entrepreneurs, agitators and disruptors who work at the forefront of their field outside of formal working structures. For this discussion, Michelle's gathered together a very interesting set of creatives and provocateurs to discuss the role of the designer as agitator. They will all bring a different point of view based on their past and present experiences and the increasing role of designers in business. We have in the panel, we have Swain, Damian Borchok, and Nicola Mansfield. So thanks very much for joining us tonight. Now, the format for this evening is a panel discussion. It will be led by Michelle. It will be followed by audience Q&A, so you will have a chance to ask questions near the end of the session. I'll be running around with a microphone. Now, before Michelle starts, I'll just invite Katja Forbes from the Interaction Design Association to say a few words.
Thanks very much. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Katja. I run the Interaction Design Association with Joe Atenzi and a bunch of other very committed people on the steering committee. We have meetups once every 2 months, which some of you have probably been to. And our next meetup is going to be July the 23rd. They fill up really fast. So we open the meetups about 10 days out. Interaction Design Association it's a global organisation, and our purpose is to support the community of interaction designers and user experience people in any country wherever we have a chapter. Sydney's got a chapter. We're trying to get one open in Melbourne. So if there's anybody that you know who would like to open a Melbourne chapter of IxDA Sydney, let me know. But we'd just like to thank the guys tonight for coming and doing this fabulous panel. And I will not stand in the way of it any further. But yeah, July 23rd, put it in your diary. But more importantly, put 10 days ahead of it in your diary so that you make sure you get a spot. Thanks, Leon. Yeah, hashtags. Oh, hashtags. Oh, I'm sorry. Hashtags. Okay, so we'd also very much like you to tweet from tonight. The hashtags for tonight are hashtag TNL for Thursday night lectures and hashtag IxDA Syd for IxDA Sydney. So you can put either one of those on there, or preferably both, and send your tweets out. Terrific.
Thank you. All right, so Nicola and I are going to show. Is this working? Okay, thank you so much. Thanks everybody for coming tonight. I realize that you have to take time out of your busy lives to be here. I am delighted to be here and for once not be in the speaker seat. I am totally going to hand this over to you. So this is the ultimate act of delegation. So when I got asked by Leon and Katja to speak tonight, I just read the brief and I was like, oh my God, I know exactly who to invite. So hopefully Nicola, Damian, and Jet will be up for the task, but we've had some prep meetings and there's plenty to say on the topic. Now, our panelists have been selected because they all have a great insight of what design brings to business and where it fits and how it's changing the nature of business. So I'm really pleased to see this broad array of experience and insight here tonight on the panel. So thanks also to Sydney University for hosting us and for taking the courage to choose us on it's the final TNL, right? Of the semester, yes. So thank you for that. That's very, 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 very much appreciated. So let me start by introducing the panel so that you know a bit who we're working with here tonight. So Nicola, right to my left here, we've been collaborating for a year now. So Nicola is a strategic creative director at Leftbrain, Rightbrain, which is her own creative brand agency, which marries strategic thought to creative execution. Nicola knows brands from Europe to Asia to Australia on global and local brands. From agency to client side, she's been in the branding game for a very long time and from every perspective. She likes brands for their transformative power. Nicola has won many design awards over the year and has worked on with a vast range of clients. She's got 20 years of experience and has a level of brand expertise which is unique to Australia. So amongst others, she's led the Jurlic brand client side as global creative director, and she's worked in the world's leading brand consultancy, Wolff Olins in London. So please make Nicola feel welcome. Then we'll hop over to Jet. Sorry, ladies first, Damian.
Wow.
So Jet's a long-standing friend of mine and mentor of mine. Jet's a disruptive thinker and thought leader who just recently joined Accenture Interactive as the Managing Director for Content Services, which they're very lucky to have her. So she's a disruptor of ideas and a wielder of influence. This is her words, I should say this.
I was about to say, they're my words.
They're her words. She uses her talents to build movements and shake up the thinking in business through experience, design, innovations, and transformation. With 20 years plus of experience as a strategic design thinker, Jet inspires and demands creativity with all the people she works with. So be careful. If you end up on her team, she will demand creativity from you. She has the rare ability to create new and far more successful solutions when the obvious answers are unsatisfactory. So again, to quote her, and as an entrepreneur and an intrapreneur, her experiences are a mix of spectacular achievements and colossal failures. Jet has recently joined Accenture with the intention of infecting her partners with a risk-taking philosophy. So please make her feel welcome. Now, last but not least is Mr. Damian Borchok. So Damian is the former CEO of the international brand agency Interbrand, but he's now the founding director of For the People. For the People is a new kind of creative agency, a platform that helps leaders reimagine business for the 21st century. Damian's had an eclectic work life, having worked in retail, banking, winery, or wine, I should say, before spending the last 15 years consulting on brand strategy and business transformation. So his previous work includes brand transformation for Telstra, Alzheimer's Australia, and Sky TV New Zealand, placemaking programs for the Rocks in Darling Harbour, cultural project for the Sydney Opera House, Opera Australia, the Griffin Theatre Company, and he is also a board director for the Australian Design Centre, otherwise known as Object Gallery, right? Please join me in welcoming Damian. Okay, let's get started on this one. I feel like a bit of a Tony Jones tonight, which is all good, right? Okay, so when reading all of your bios just now, do you remember? Everybody remembers. A lot of these keywords popped up. Disruption, innovation, transformation, leadership. And they're not always words that we associate with design. So Damian, let me start with you. I'm going to pick on you. What is the definition of a designer? And what is the definition of an entrepreneur?
When Michelle asked me to answer this question, I said no. So I'm doing it under sufferance. So I'm not a big fan of the definition, because inevitably somebody finds a loophole or wants to wordsmith the definition, and I don't find any of those sort of conversations particularly useful. But to give you broad definitions, and these are very broad, the way that I think of the design is that I keep thinking of the words of Bill Moggridge, who was one of the founders of IDEO, and he talked about, if you look around the man-made world, everything that we see and everything we touch has been designed in some way. And if you think of it in those terms, you then start to see that the role of the designer is the role of someone who plans and shapes things. They look at challenges and opportunities, and they shape solutions around those. So in its broader sense, that is their role. I think the interesting thing is that right now the role of designer is becoming particularly interesting for business, particularly given the substantial revolution we're seeing in technology. And I think that the really interesting role that they're playing now is the one that builds the bridge between the customer or human beings and technology. And I think that's the really exciting role that they have to play. To come to the entrepreneur, I think and I'll probably channel Eric Ries a little bit here with his definition, because he's probably talked the best about, I think, that I've read at least. And the differentiator between the garden variety businessman and an entrepreneur is the fact that most people in business, their role is not to take risk. It is to avoid it at all cost. And that is the structure of the traditional organisation that essentially operates under a model that's roughly 100 plus years old, where old organisations have built up assets and you need to extract value from them, so you need to protect them. The entrepreneur takes a very different role in what they need to do. they take huge risks about things to which there is very little evidence that it will succeed. And as a consequence, the imperative for them is very different. Their approach to actually tackling problems is very different. They have to deal with this problem that businesses absolutely hate, which is actually to confront the unknowing and to still make decisions and to keep moving forward and work their way through this maze of unknowns until they get to hopefully an outcome that is positive, but in the vast majority of cases it is not. And so it's a very, very different animal to your traditional business person. I think a little bit later we'll probably end up talking about the crossover between the designer and the entrepreneur and those skill sets, because I think that's, again, an interesting confluence that we're starting to see.
Thanks for that. Nicola, just building on what Damian has said, who are the leaders and the followers in business and design?
Thank you. So this is, I think, exactly where that point of convergence happens. We discussed a lot, and we really needed to spend some time defining the difference between entrepreneurs and designers, because we can see that more and more often designers are becoming entrepreneurs, and entrepreneurs often are coming out of the design world. So we were really clear on needing to define this for the purposes of this discussion. One of the things that really helped us in arriving at that definition was considering the difference between an entrepreneur and somebody like a COO in the world of business. So you've got people whose sole purpose is to take risks. And then you've got people, as Damian said, whose sole purpose is to come in and scale that idea and make it sustainable and make it process-oriented so that you can export it to different locations. So there's a really clear definition in the business world about entrepreneur versus, as you say, Damian, the garden variety business person. I think what we're less good at doing is identifying those same differences in the world of design. And we are, with the huge amounts of information that we all have access to, I think the ability to imitate what we see as designers, the ability to imitate in the world around us is in front of us every day. And less often do we have the time to craft a truly innovative solution. So as a result of information and time shrinkage, I think the easy route is always to imitate. Perhaps to pick elements from what we've seen and combine it in a slightly different way, but the innovation comes in the combination as opposed to the thought process. So I guess where we were talking about this was, wouldn't it be amazing if we were able to really hang on to that notion of risk-taking in the design world and identify its value and its importance and almost begin to separate out the different fields within design discipline. Design is a hugely broad definition, both in terms of the nature of what we're designing, but also the way that our minds work. There are definitely innovators and there are definitely people who can scale. In traditional terms, we'd talk about concept and implementation. But I think suddenly it's all becoming design and we're expected to all be innovators and all be able to scale. So I think in that sense, design has a lot to learn from the world of business.
So we're kind of asking the designer to be able to be the jack of all trades in some respects, so the breaking down that definition a bit further is really useful. Jet, I'm going to turn my attention to you. What are the skills that you think a designer needs, and has the skill base changed, in the past 50 years or so, whatever?
I'm going to situate this firstly by saying I think that a designer has a very particular human quality, which is quite different to that of an entrepreneur or that of a business person. And it's one of the reasons why I work quite a lot with startups. It's one of the reasons why we don't see many designer founders. And the reason being that to be a creative by nature, whilst you may be an extrovert in your creation, you're often introvert in your ability to talk about yourself or sell yourself. One of the key skills for an entrepreneur is to never accept the answer no, and to be able to sell yourself like nobody else can, to truly, truly believe in yourself. Now, without that, if you cannot back yourself completely as an entrepreneur, you will not succeed. Because to be a successful entrepreneur, you need people to buy into you, people buy people. You need people to invest in you, to give you money. And it is one of the, and Mal sitting up in the corner will agree with me because he's been there a couple of times. If people will not say yes to you and invest in you, your idea, there are very few self-funded entrepreneurs. Let's be clear. As a designer, and I have really struggled with this for a long time. I know what I know, but I had a really hard time telling people what I knew and selling myself for work. Because as an artist or as a designer or as a creative, one of the hardest things to do is to sell yourself. So it's a fundamental difference in the way that we work. So whilst skill sets for designers, what are you've got a deep passion and curiosity about the way the world works. You have a huge imagination. You've got an objectivity and a self-awareness that many entrepreneurs don't have. You've got a global awareness. You've got this kind of context with the world. You're a brilliant executor, and if you've got a real sense of context, if you like. So you're an outward-looking person. Entrepreneurs, whilst being the same, are all about strong communication skills, great management skills, be really, really, really good at sales, believe in yourself like no one else in the world can. They have a deep love for what they do, which is slightly different to a deep passion. And I think if you're a designer in this room, you'll know what that difference is. So to love something, to believe in it deeply, versus needing it like the oxygen you breathe, but passion, they're slightly different things. And for me, that is where, and I'm going to jump into the business design skill, it's the combination of those two. That bilateral belief of truly believing in something and knowing how to ask for what you need, knowing how to sell it. The whole brain, as Daniel Pink goes on about, and I'm sure you've all probably read that book, and it's now kind of becoming, mainstream, if you like. But business design, design thinking, strategic design, I'm sure you've all heard it, most businesses. I'm at Accenture for that reason. I'm a business designer, an experienced designer. And Accenture, the big technology and management consulting firm, have bought Fjord, one of the world's leading strategic design agencies, and they're moving into this field because design needs a seat at the C table. They need to step up and I used to laugh about it. My background is creative agencies, and we used to laugh about it, saying that we used to feel like, Christmas Day, there's the grown-up table and the kiddies table. We used to feel like our seat was at the kiddies table, and it's time for us to step up and take a seat at the big people's table, at the grown-up table. But it is a different mindset that we need to embrace. We need to take our right brain and add some left thinking to it.
Damian, you led Interbrand for a number of years, and you've now created For the People. How do you make sure that you're not seated at the kiddie table?
I've never had ambitions to be at the kiddie table, and often because that's always been my view, is that I think it's ridiculous that you think that you should have a lower position, because when I look at businesses, I see most of the businesses that I walk into are fundamentally broken, and they're broken for a very common reason, and that is because the mental models that those organisations have, particularly at a very senior leadership position, are broken. I can walk into a business and see all the conventions that they all operate to that every other player in that category works to, and the decision-making processes. And you can very easily pull a business apart as a consequence of those similarities. So the thing that for me that's really interesting that a designer's mind brings is the ability to be able to recognise that and then to go, how do we actually find other combinations that can't be seen because of these very rigid mental models and rules that businesses have built around themselves. And so that's a fundamentally important thing that organisations their agenda, if you're a well-established business, is not to innovate. That is not the purpose of those businesses. It is to protect and to extract value from the assets that have been created by and large, and that's why innovation is so rare. And so they're not, and that's why the current growth of most large businesses is very low, because the innovation isn't there to drive high growth. So the role of the designer, and the interesting thing, and it's kind of heartening, because even though the designer may not have necessarily the full skill set, nobody has the full skill set to be in the C-suite or to be a leader of a business. Nobody. Mark Zuckerberg couldn't do what he does without Cheryl. You need the combination of skills and extraordinary skills to be very successful. But I think there's a growing number of designers who are actually extraordinarily successful entrepreneurs. Brian Chesky at Airbnb was an industrial designer. And there's actually a fairly substantial growing list of founders who are actually designers. And I kind of dug a few out. Flickr, Instagram, YouTube, SlideShare, Slack, Mint, Behance, Tumblr, Android when it was first iteration. All of those have a founder in there that has a design background. You look at the career of somebody like John Mader, who's spent a fair amount of career in academia and art and design, and now he's been, he's kind of one of the front guys at Kleiner Perkins, and all of a sudden a whole bunch of other VC firms have bought in other designers because they recognise that with their investments, one of the fundamental investments they have to now make is this ability to take what is typically in startups a very heavy engineering mindset. And engineers typically are great at technology, but not technology fit for human consumption. The designer actually builds that bridge. And that's the real value that they bring, and that's the real power that someone like a John Mader has been able to bring very quickly to Kleiner Perkins and their investments. And I think we'll continue to see that as the years progress as well.
Nicola, I want to ask you the same question because you come from a slightly different background. What do you think are the skills that designers need in business?
I think, and thinking about the way that the relationship with the client might work as well, and pairing those things together. I know that definitely we all have jobs because things in business are broken, but I guess the thing that, from my perspective, and I think the way that the world is moving, I think where we can go in and really listen and unlock the insight that perhaps those clients don't see for themselves. And we see it all the time. It's staring us in front of the face. We can identify it, but the clients might not be able to see it. And at the very heart of that insight is this golden nugget, which is a question of collecting it and harnessing it and then building it outwards so that you end up with a solution, a transformative solution. I think designers need to be able to do that. They need to be able to actively listen. They need to identify what is that absolute essence that is at the heart of everything, and then help that client to forget about the broken methodologies and build outwards to create a new solution, a new experience, and then to constantly use that as a touchstone, because I think people forget and they want to head off on tangents. I think the role of the designer in that instance is to bring that client back to that nugget that we've identified and collaboratively agreed on. I think the notion of being able to moderate collaboration, it's a very different way of working, and I find in my work more and more, I want to just be the facilitator. I want the client to arrive at the solution by guiding them there, because I've actively listened and I've identified something that I think is able to be harnessed, and then I want the client to assist in building out those solutions, because then they own it. It's not an afterthought that some external person who doesn't really get their business or doesn't understand the cultural nuances has come in and put upon them. So I think out of that, the core skills are definitely active listening, to be able to hang on to that vision with tenacity, but most importantly, to be brave. And I think the risk-taking piece, business is there, it scales because it's trying to move and shy away from risk. So you've got a group of people who are there in their roles to mitigate risk. And the best solutions are definitely always going to require a risk. So I think the designer has to be able to inspire, and talking about the sales piece, Jet, I think a designer has to sell the vision in a way that everybody can connect with it. So I'd say the skills of the designer are definitely active listening, being able to identify those absolute core moments, to hang on to them with tenacity, and to have bravery and inspire everyone to go on that journey.
So we talked about the client, you mentioned the client a little bit. There is always somebody commissioning you. If you're a designer, there's somebody who wants what it is that you're going to produce, or who has set you in front of a set of circumstances. Or if it's not a client in a person, it will be a user group or a specific problem that you're trying to solve. How important, in your experience, Nicola, has the client been? And maybe in abstract terms, without naming names, could you tell us about a few scenarios where maybe there's been a really good client interaction to a really good outcome, and maybe a not so good one that led to a not so good outcome? I don't know, I'm not sure.
I think the best situations are absolutely when you've established trust. That's life, right? You've got to be able to establish trust with your client. Clients are going to trust you if they think that you're listening to them. So there's a beautiful self-fulfilling cycle of success there. If you can really listen, if you can play the words back to them in a manner that you've managed to make sense of it so that it's going to fix whatever their problem is, there's trust. The more trust there is, the more they're going to let you be brave with their solution. And that is the cycle. So it's about real partnership. And I think, true transformation, you have to be at the adults' table. Because if you're at the kids' table, you're just moving stuff around on the page. You're finding superficial solutions that are not going to genuinely fix problems. They might look good, but they're not going to fix problems.
Damian, how do you approach it? Having to tell, you said before, you come into business and you kind of see all the things that are broken within minutes of being there. How do you manage that, and how do you break the news?
I have a slightly different approach. Well, I kind of almost feel like it's almost like the personal trainer type thing, in that you actually have to reset the ground rules and the expectations. I think, because there's an assumption when you come to a client is that you're going to just serve them, and that is the predominant belief. And I'm like, if you're paying me money, that's the last thing I want to do.
Serve you.
Yes, I am not here to serve you. I am here to grab you by the throat and drag you along, and to actually transform this business. Because unless and what you have to do, trust is important, but honesty is the first point. And you have to be able to look a client in the eye and go, this is crap. Do you recognise this? Because if we don't have that common ground, I can't fix the problem. And so it's part of the adult conversation. Often CEOs don't get that from their people, because the sycophancy within most businesses is appalling. And so that's a really fundamentally important piece. And you have to recognise that, you have to empathise with them in saying, you know what, I know what you're going to feel in the next couple of meetings we're going to have. You're going to have a physiological reaction to these comments that I'm going to make, and you're going to have a knot in your stomach you're going to want to get rid of. Because that's your body saying, this is another one of those risk situations that I like to kill. And so what I do is that I make sure that they're aware of that, and I say, when you feel that, don't get rid of it. That is just simply your body reacting to something foreign. Now, you need to keep that, and you need to think about that, because you're going to feel a lot of that through this process, because that's what change is. That's what actually taking risks are. That is doing something that you don't normally do, and your body going, I don't like that. And
someone once described it as the immune system coming out.
Absolutely, and it's killing the antibodies are coming out to kill that new thing that's coming into the business. So, and what the point of that is to lay the ground rules for how we will work, and then it's up to the client to actually make the decision whether that's an experience they want to have or not. Because if you say no, that's fine. I'm happy to part ways with you. But if you want to go along this path, I will understand your business, and I'll also tell you what's broken, and I'll help you, and I'll work with you to fix it. But don't hire me under false pretenses, and I won't take this job under false pretenses. And that's the way I would usually start with a relationship.
Jet, are you a straight talker?
You know what? You all think that I am. I know. But I remember not that long ago being, creative by nature. I remember really struggling with saying what I thought. Don't look at me like that, it's true. I do, and there are still moments where I think twice about it, because I know I'm not always right. I said it. I do think that there are, look, you know what, at the end of the day, I have recently joined a huge firm, and I did it, because I love the idea of disrupting the fuck and B, because I need money. You know, I need to earn money. There is always a commercial side to this. And I don't care what anybody says. I remember when I was at Fine Arts and selling my wares at Paddington Markets, and the Eastern Suburbs ladies had come up to me and say, do you do it in red? And part of me would be like, I need to smack you, and the other part would be, I need to pay my rent. There is always that tug of war. And I think we're being dishonest to ourselves if we don't acknowledge that. I would love to go in and tell everybody what I thought and just, you know, jam your fees. I don't need them and walk out the door, but that is not always.
That's not always the liberty.
And particularly the younger you are, and you know, there are lots of people in here that are really young. So. This brings
us to the next question, which is around the idea of, and I'm going to stay with you, Jet, on this one. We've talked about this a lot amongst ourselves, but what's the business model of design, and what kind of future does it have?
Look, I have been going on for a long time about the role of design in business, and I agree with Damian. I think that there have been many experiences where I've walked into a business and really quickly seen what's wrong with it and wondered what's wrong with them and why they can't see it. And a lot of the reasons why they can't see it is because they don't have the same brain that I do. But in saying that, and one of the big struggles I have in my 4 months at Accenture is I don't have the same brain they do. Therefore, there's so much process to go through to get anything done. And I can fight it and fight it and fight it. But eventually you realise that if you find ways through the process, that's easier. And I often say to even, you know, my daughters who are turning into little rebels, God bless their cotton socks, you know, Steve Jobs Mark I and Steve Jobs Mark II, he wasn't a lesser person for going away and learning the rules of business. What it taught him was how to come back and play them. And I think that that's a really important learning for all of us. And I know, you know, I'm no sycophantic Steve person, but, you know, he pushed and he pushed and he pushed and he pushed because he really, really believed what he thought. And as disruptors, and trust me, I've had a lot of experience, you either eject yourself or get ejected. And eventually, that wears thin, because when you either eject yourself or you get ejected, then the change stops, the transformation stops. And I'm going to use an example, you know, that is a little bit competitive, but I was at UTS Business School as a marketing director, and I knew instantly what was wrong. I knew that the MBAs of the world were completely ruining it, and that they needed to have some empathy and to learn some design thinking and to not be so greedy and to bring in some, you know, sustainability and environment, all those things we talk about. And I went to a dean's conference, and knowing that there's a dean in the room, I will speak in riddle. But I went to a business school dean's conference at Florida, Disneyland, can you believe it, of all places. And there were water bubbler conversations happening with the deans and it was just after the, you know, financial crash, is this our responsibility? Have we done this? And I remember standing there thinking, yes, you have. You educated them, you put them out there. Wall Street's all your fault. And so we came home and we started, and you know, I don't have an MBA. I have a fine arts degree, for goodness sake. And let's just, you know, put it into relativity. But we started talking about what is the role of the future business leader. What does a business leader for the 21st century need? And they need more of what designers have and less of what current business people have. So we started a Bachelor of Business and also a Master's of Business Design, which is about putting design, so you need your administrators, you need your MBAs, you will always need them. But we need business designers at the table too. Because the true magic happens when you put a mathematician and a magician together. And they have respect for each other's fields and trust for each other's knowledge. And it's like two sticks rubbing together and you get that third, you know, or, you know, they call it abductive reasoning, you know, and I'm no Roger Martin or Tim Brown and they came up with those ideas. But this design thinking is the idea of taking a left and a right or taking a science and a intuition and putting them together. And that's the power of designers in business. And it is going to change the way business is done. And I know that everyone thinks it's over-talked and it's overdone, but I am fundamentally going to go into Accenture with the belief that as a designer, I can help my clients transform to be 21st century fit.
So Thanks for that.
Sorry, that was a little dissertation, really, wasn't it?
Damien, you've got a really interesting new agency that you're getting off the ground. Can you tell us a little bit about your business model and how you work?
Okay. I've kind of worked in this industry or in the sort of brand consulting world for about sort of 15, 20 years, and it's an extraordinarily small industry, even by global standards. And then I often used to say to my bosses, like, if we were so smart, why are we so small? But I think that part of it is that there's a challenge with the kind of business model where you actually have to, in most instances, where you have to pay for head hours, and like it's everything's about analysing the numbers of this stuff, and it's not particularly interesting. And once you allow clients and procurement departments to get into that, they slowly eat away at that anyway, because they understand the mathematics of your business much better. And there are some procurement departments that, you know, time and time again, and they do get it. They ask for the people's salaries, and then they do the analysis on them and tell you what you should be getting back. And I say that any agency that does that is a complete idiot, and any individual who actually signs off on a release form to do that is a complete fool. Because as far as I'm concerned, no company apart from your employer should know that information. But our view is that there are different ways that you can actually look at the creation of value, and a lot of our work is with startups, and so we have, broadly speaking, two structures. One of them is that rather than linking head hours to deliverables, clients simply buy a chunk of time, and they keep buying chunks of time depending on sort of what time they need of our capability, and then within that time they can get whatever they need. And so it decouples actually the deliverable from the time that you spend, and that allows us to be quite dynamic in how we actually provide services, and if they need to change things, we can do that very quickly. The second part of the business model is one where we put skin in the game with our client, and with startups they often don't have big money, so we like a venture capital business, but we call it venture services, as we actually take a share in a business, and then we provide for either a very reduced fee or no fee at all the services that are required to actually get that business started. And so we basically put our money where our mouth is. We're backing those startups. We look at those startups in detail the same way a venture capital business would, so that we actually understand whether this is a good idea, whether it's viable, whether we like the team, whether we can work together, all those sort of things. And then we take a position in those businesses. And so that's the other side of it. And so we're prepared to take risks that most agencies won't, because they're always going, well, if we don't follow the traditional model, we may not get the return and we might go bankrupt. And I've done it often enough. I kind of know how these business models work, and I've never had a sort of failed business, because you can if you're smart about it, you can make this stuff work. And so we've very quickly sort of grown, and we've grown off the back of taking those sort of positions, and also taking a slightly contrarian way of engaging clients. And two of our best clients we said no to originally as well, because we didn't like what they put on the table in terms of how we should work together. And they came back and said, no, we want to work with you, and we'll change the way that we work to actually allow a model to work better for everybody. And that's, again, another thing that most organisations are fearful for. They will pitch everything and burn their people in the hope that they'll win something just to get the money through the door, as opposed to actually being highly selective about, is this work interesting? Do I have a client who's really committed to this, or are they just doing it because it's on their annual operating plan to do? And that's how you get work that is meaningful and useful, and you'll attract talent into your business, because you'll get to work on the work that people want to work on, and you'll get results because you've got clients committed to that work. And the more that you say no to, you'll find out the ones that are really committed, or the ones that are actually just playing games. And it's really good to have the ones playing games out of your business, because they just screw your business up, and you achieve nothing from working with them.
And that is a gorgeous utopia, but we all
It's not a utopia, you can do it. I've done it for 15 years.
I've been a freelancer long enough that we all know, and to quote Seinfeld, everyone has a Pinsky file at some point in their life where you go to work and you get paid. And it was the Pinsky file. Am I the only one old enough in the room to know Seinfeld?
No, I love it.
But I think that just for that little shot of reality, I mean, I agree with you
completely.
It's
not about reality, it's about courage. It is about actually staring at clients and saying...
There's a commercialisation to courage as well, though.
No, I disagree.
argue.
Look, yeah, of course we can. We can argue, but there are too many agencies that roll over at the first sign of a client coughing.
I agree.
The one thing I wanted
to
to add here is that probably some people in the room as well might come from architecture and kind of built environment backgrounds, and we've had this chat behind closed doors as well around, the just conforming to a business model that's not really going anywhere. The idea that, so-and-so will do it for free, or giving away IP for free, any IP through competition process or whatever that is. It's something that architects are so willing to do and jump in. Look, I'm the first one to do it because I'm doing the Venice Biennale thing, and that's certainly not.
So why are you doing that for free?
Because I'm an idiot. No, just kidding.
Why are you doing that?
No, because it's a fantastic opportunity, but it does, from a commercial perspective, it goes against, and you're doing stuff in that vein as well, Damian, where you do it, the three things, I think you told me this, there's three reasons to do projects. It's the people, the passion, or the project itself.
Or the profit.
Sorry.
Don't forget the last P.
Yeah.
The people, the passion, or the profit. That's right. People, passion, and profit. And if two of those things, and in this one it's the people and the passion, are definitely aligned there, but it's not and you do some of these things as well.
But we choose to do it because that's what we want.
And you choose to do it.
Yeah.
Nicola, did you have something to add around that kind of business model conversation?
Yeah, look, I think it's, off what you've just said, I think the problem with creatives and looking at a room full of architecture students, you guys know this, too often our value is in the process. We love the process. We're passionate about the process. And we know that we could be making more money if we're in investment banking, but let's face it, that doesn't interest us. So I think, we spoke a lot behind closed doors about, and for you guys specifically, about not being prepared to starve for your art. And I think that's something that designers too often are prepared to do. It's almost like a badge of honour. And why is that? And how can we change that? We've spoken a lot about consultancy model and how does that work, because you've got a set number of hours to sell. You can increase your hourly rate incrementally based on enormous successes. Of course. You can increase your hourly rate incrementally, but there comes a point where you've got nothing left to sell. Is that your ceiling? And I think in terms of hours and in terms of what the market is prepared to pay for. So it's tough. It's tough. I don't know what the magic solution is. I know Reba has certainly commissioned a whole bunch of papers looking at the architecture industry specifically. And I think very much in line with the design in business, they're calling for architecture to design their business. So this competition-based thinking and people living on, delayed payments and so on and so forth, how can skill sets be actually ironically teased out in the way that we've spoken about entrepreneurship and scalability? How can that sort of model be implemented more in architecture so that you can meet different projects more effectively? So I think it's a perfect time for the architecture industry to really look at how it's going and what the value of design and fresh thinking and reinvention and transformation could add to your industry. Because I think starving for your art doesn't need to be a badge of honour anymore.
No, definitely not. Okay, so let's move on to the next question, which is one that I'd originally intended for Damian, but I'm going to ask Jet first. What are the limits of the role of designers in business? Where does that fall off?
I was telling a funny story in the foyer before. So I was joking about going to Accenture and said, but I want a Mac. And the guy who runs APAC said, that's easy, I'll just put the word designer in your title. So I get there on the first day, I'm a content designer, I get a Mac. So I think fundamentally that explains what big business thinks a designer does. We Mac shit up. Now I'm no graphic designer, but I have my Mac, and and seriously, that is an honest to God story, and it truly happened. And people say to me, "Why have you got designer in your title?" It's like, because I wanted a Mac. That's what they think about design as, the people who produce stuff. Yeah. But in my role as a business designer, not only am I building what they call a practice within Accenture, but I am also designing digital customer experiences and ecosystems for my clients. And the very nature of design, and you know, we could say it's just semantics, but it's so much more than semantics. Since when did design mean that we were, you know, little people sitting in front of Macs designing stuff? You know, it shouldn't and should never have meant that. To design something is to create, to innovate, to build. There's so many words, you know, you get the thesaurus out and there are lots of, you know, synonyms, which I can't say the word, I've never been able to, synonyms, for design. And I think we really, that for me is the biggest hurdle, to get people to take me seriously as a business designer. I am designing businesses, I'm not designing logos. And it is a constant challenge.
Focus on the product, on the output.
It's the word design.
Do you find that as well, Damian? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, and it's a two-way problem. I've had the good fortune to work with some really extraordinary designers, and the last thing they want to do is get near a Mac.
Exactly.
They love to talk to the CEO about their business and the various departments, and they want to know the mechanic of the organisation first, and the dynamics between them and their customers, and what are the constraints and all that sort of stuff. And then they like to talk through a problem and thrash things out, so that by the time they actually get to a solution, it becomes obvious because they've talked themselves into what that answer is, and the picture starts to build in your mind. And that's a really great designer. The part of the problem is that, and this problem is self-inflicted by designers as well, there are lots of them love living on the Mac. They just won't get off it. Like, they will, as soon as they get a brief, they'll go over the Mac and start moving things around a screen. It's like, get off that thing. That's not what you're doing. There are lots of, you know, even in education, because we do incubators with various universities, and when we talk to the students, they often talk about how, you know, they're still being taught about letterpress and poster design and things, and it's like, this is the 21st century. I mean, it's like, yes, okay, perhaps some people like to fetishise that sort of stuff, but it's not what's going to actually help us change the world. And, you know, the relationship between design, people, technology, and solving so many of these massive problems, whether they're large global problems or just operating problems within businesses and the creation of new products and services, is a vast and complex thing. And if the design community, and there's a very large proportion of the design community that loves doing logos and loves sitting on Macs and whatever, if you think they're the kind of people that are going to be part of the change to business and to entrepreneurship and to innovation, no. They are the dinosaurs. They're the ones that are going to get vaporised.
Play, but they're not playing a transformation.
No. And so,
they're styling.
Yeah, and you have to be very clear about. It's not all designers we're talking about here, and there are groups of designers who are fantasists about what they can achieve, and then there are others that actually get down to the hard, ugly work of actually being a really great designer.
I do think,
and that's the exciting bit.
I think you need both though, because I'm a designer in that I'm a future builder, or I paint the picture. But for me to articulate that, the amount of times I sit in front of a designer and say, help me visualise this, I need this put into a really simple, and there are people out there that can visualise an idea, so designers that can visualise a thought so well. I mean, I know the infographic is dead, but in its day, that was a really cool art, and sometimes I feel like I need people to take what's in here and put it on a piece of paper for me or for the client, or
without what's in your head.
You can't let it get away with a comment like that.
The infographic is dead. It wasn't me, it was Fast Company, I promise.
No, but
it must be true. It must be true.
No, but without that kind of more fundamental and design thinking, whatever that visualization is wouldn't really have any agency. It's the way in which it works with the upfront thinking.
I think
Nicola,
in that context, that's one method of it. Is design making something look beautiful, or is design conceiving what you're trying to visualize?
Or is it both?
That's also
is it either or?
Well, I think for those designers that are sitting at the Mac, who want a written brief. I'm not going to start this until I have a written brief. Forget about it. The brief is just an excuse to not listen and talk to your client and find it out for yourself.
Agree.
And if you think that the client is going to be able to capture for you what you need to know, you're wrong.
The creative thought starter.
Absolutely. The things that you will be able to identify through a conversation are going to deliver more out of the creation process than anything that can be put on the page.
Yeah.
So I think it's about having the conversations. I think it's about identifying what, get that thought process happening in your mind. And, I come from a graphics background, so I'll speak in 2D for this moment. You guys obviously are working in 3D, but have that thought process, be able to express it, be able to share it with the client and say, look what I made. And they're like, oh my God, that's it, that's the answer. And then make it look beautiful.
And then make it beautiful.
But I think if you start with the looking beautiful, you've missed the entire process of what the true creation is about.
So we're talking about an expanded skill set, we're talking about strategic thought, we're talking about analysis, we're talking about listening, we're talking about understanding the world the way it is and being able to see constraints and opportunities in a really distinctive way. What does this mean when we talk about the designer having to fulfill this kind of brief? What does this mean for design education?
It's almost one I want to ask you guys. I think, look, what we spoke about this is the problem starts at the very beginning. We are teaching our kids times tables, and we're expecting that Australia is going to have an economy that's not based on pulling stuff out of the ground. So if we're going to be about knowledge, but we're teaching rote thinking, there is a huge disconnect. So I guess the impetus there is for our schools, our primary schools, our secondary schools, our universities, to really be able to think about how we teach that creation process, how to be able to listen, how to have that idea, how to see something that your client doesn't see, but we do, how to capture that in a manner so that it makes sense and fixes problems, and then share it back to the client so that they've got something that they can hang on to and move forward with.
So focus more on a process rather than specific facts or knowledge. Yeah. What do you think, Damian? The education piece.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting seeing, and I'll come to the education piece, but I'll start with what I observe with companies that hire like industrial design firms. Like they fly out IDEO and they go, we've got IDEO in here, and they spend ages in there and nothing pops out the other end, and you go, what happened there? And I feel sorry for IDEO because they get such a great reputation, and it's like, what happened? It's like the conditions were wrong. The conditions were wrong for innovation. If you actually play that on a larger scale, that's exactly the challenge that education has, is that the purpose of education is to create the conditions in which minds can actually be shaped to be able to deal with the era in which they need to operate in. And I think that's the great challenge, is that we have an industrialised model for a different revolution. We now need to actually recognise there's another one going on, and there's a different skill set. And I think that, luckily, one of the interesting things that I find with being on the board of the Australian Design Centre is that they actually provide a course on design thinking to kids called Design Emergency. But trying to get that actually scaled within education is near on impossible right now. So we're looking at other ways of actually looking at doing that, because it's like, no, because what we've done is that we've basically built this shanty town of educational agendas over 100 years, and somebody needs to basically put a bulldozer through a lot of that to start again with some fresh ground and start to say, well, what are the proper building blocks that we need? But there are so many agenda items, it's near on impossible. And that's going to be very challenging, because it's really going to be up to not the education system, but the individuals to find their own way through those problems to be actually successful and capable at being great innovators and great thinkers and great entrepreneurs, because the education system won't be necessarily helping in that regard.
That resonates with me a lot, because I grew up in France, and in France the whole education system is based on military command and control. So, you couldn't possibly talk to the teacher because the teacher knows everything and you know nothing, right? But that was designed because of a place and a time and a context where everybody who had any ounce of education had their head chopped off. So by the time Napoleon came around, he had to build a middle class and he had to build it fast. And that's where the education comes from. And growing up in that system, you grow up thinking, oh, well, there are things that are right and there are things that are wrong, and I must make sure for survival that I remember the things that are right, which is completely different to my experience going to school in England, for example, after I left high school in France. So it's very interesting to see that context piece, I think, is absolutely spot on. Do you have a comment on that, Jed?
Ever so quickly, I think the missing link for innovation is it's not either or, and I think that when people think that there was an industrial revolution and then there was this thing that my dean used to call the knowledge economy, and now I don't think it has to be either or. We can have use our hands, the industrial revolution, and use our heads, the knowledge economy, and use our hearts in what I like to call the affection economy, and put all of them together. And I think that's where the change will come. I think you're absolutely right. You need certain conditions, for many things, and you definitely need them to realise innovation. And there are three archetypes for innovation. It's the passive, the dominant, and the kind of co-produced innovation. And any one of them are okay, depending on what the conditions are. And I think that education has a long way to go, and I am the mother of teenage daughters, and I get so frustrated that they come home with, look at the pyjama pants I made. It's like, are you kidding me? Have you learnt to code today? So it is slow, but I think that the role innovation has to play is for us to stop trying to put it in buckets and let it be. Let us combine industrial with knowledge, with affection, and and get whole mind, whole brain thinkers. I hate hearing this, are you a left or a right brain thinker? Because quite frankly, you're going to need to be both.
I think that's a great point to invite members of the audience, some very keen ones, to ask questions. We've got about a half hour for Q&A, but there's a microphone somewhere, so Leon, maybe you can do the run around. Just make sure you tell us who the question's for.
Hi, I'd like to ask everybody, actually, all three panellists. Andrew Marr, the British broadcaster, recently said that spreadsheet decisions were killing the art world. And I'd like to put that to you and ask you what you thought about that, and how art influences obviously the creative process, but not the business process, and how you need to use the art world to call upon the art world to help you with a successful project and a stylish project and something that's going to be groundbreaking. You can't just use the same thing over and over again. So there's a crossover there somewhere.
Yep. Your comment's a bit of a hobby horse of mine, actually.
Lucky you.
Yeah, because it's like, you do, and I'll talk specifically about arts organisations because it's an interesting category to talk about, in that there's a belief within arts organisations that actually the only place the art should happen is either on the stage or screen or on a gallery wall or whatever, and that there should be absolutely no innovation, no creativity in the administration of those businesses or the business models. And I think that's just complete rubbish. Like, it is so funny because I work with a lot of cultural organisations, and it's like, that separation is insane. It's like you have people who are wanting to be in a place that is creative and dynamic and innovative and shaping our culture, and you only let a fraction of your talent actually shine. That's nuts. It's like the director or CEO should be working hand in hand with the artistic director about their marketing and how they actually attract new audiences and fund these things. And it's like that's the crossover. Why create a wall between that? It's really interesting when you ask, people about Mona, for example, in the art world, in the traditional art world, and they go, oh, that's good for David Walsh because he's got lots of money and he doesn't have to work to a government charter and funding, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, you're missing the point here. Nobody told him to go and do that. He just went out and did it. It's like you have some constraints that you have to deal with in the same way. He had different ones. But don't use your constraints as an excuse for doing nothing. Because you know what? The government can change their mind about how they fund you tomorrow and go and chop you off at the legs and go, sorry, you're not getting what that $1 million you got before. And you're left to your own. And so if you don't have the wherewithal to actually innovate, you're dead. And that's coming. We have another GFC, and I reckon there'll be a whole bunch of arts organisations will not get funding. Last GFC, business basically said, we've stopped funding the arts, by and large, internationally. Yeah. Government will do it next time, except to the really big ones. That industry needs to recognise that fast.
And I'd say further to that, I did a project in the West, and when we heard from the groups, the stakeholders, the industrial stakeholders, they were actually driving that organisation to innovate, to be at the edge, to think about societal impact as opposed to a curatorial remit. So the stakeholders are asking for it. The industry that's going to be funding it are asking for it. And I think unless you have a position, you blend into a silent mass. So I think your survival is dependent on staking a position and working towards societal change as opposed to curatorial, definition which is past.
I was wanting to define the skill sets that you guys were looking for, particularly from designers. So we're in a room full of them. When looking at, so for example, are you looking for urban planners who get into the user experience field and have a business acumen? And that's just open to everyone.
I think one of the key things that I'm so excited about is people who have the capability to wear multiple hats. I think the freshness of thought that comes from seeing a creative challenge from multiple perspectives is infinitely richer than from being siloed and sitting behind a map, refusing to engage with anybody. So I think the more perspectives that you can bring to your work, the more experiences from different angles of life, the richer your outcome is going to be. And I would say tenacity. I said it before. I think having that idea, you've not imitated it, you've invented it, you've seen the opportunity, you believe in it, and you can sell it. So I'd say ability to see the world from different perspectives, tenacity and belief, and the ability to tell a good story so that you bring people on the journey with you.
And mine are similar. I've spent the last week writing job descriptions or rewriting them. You should have seen them, they were hideous. And so I have a list because I thought someone might ask. And so I am looking for people that can thrive in a terrifyingly corporate management consulting world. But I want people who... I'm really selling this, aren't I? Does anyone want to come and work with me? I'm looking for people who are passionate and have a curiosity that just is unrivaled. And you can tell when that's false or not. Like that's just a part of who you are. That you have imagination, that you have an objectivity and a self-awareness. I said some of this before. That you're a great communicator and you can tell a good story, because that is the future, to be able to get people to connect with their hearts. A business acumen and a global awareness and perspective. You must be flawless at execution, because so many people are good at the talk and they cannot come in and do the walk. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but as designers, we know how to do process. And that's what a lot of those business guys out there, they actually can't execute. They can talk it, they can't actually do it. You've got to have a really good intuition for context. Intuition is something that I'm not ageist by any means. I have no belief that you've got to work 10 years before you can be a manager. That's rubbish. But I do think your intuition is honed by your experience. And experience is not connected to time, but the more experiences you have, the sharper your intuition becomes. So I think expose yourself to as much as you can. And at the end of it all, you've got to have talent. It's something that we can't teach you. I can teach you content. I can teach you how to talk to those hideously frightened new business development team people things. But if you don't have talent, there's not much I can do.
Just quickly, how would you define that when you're looking in a resume or during an interview?
So I look hideous on paper, and so I trust that lots of other people do too. I meet them. I go out of my way to either have a Skype or even just a chat. If you're chatting with someone directly, you can really get a feel for who they are. I'm all about the human experience, though. So
there's just one other thing I'd like to add to that, because one of the observations I saw early on in some designers is that they get a brief and the next thing they do is they go to a whole bunch of design books to look for inspiration, and that's a surefire sign of dysfunction, because I think the skill of a really good designer is that they're autodidactic. They immerse themselves and are constantly learning, and they are constantly looking for sources of ways of actually reshaping how they think about the world, and then they form an opinion about that then shapes their own style and their own way of approaching a problem or a solution. And I think that's a very sure sign of a designer who is mature and adaptive in their own skill set, and it's also a very strong sign of someone who isn't simply going to respond to a brief or a problem in an expected way. They're the people who are the true creatives. They see the world and they've learnt from the world, and then they actually want to rethink how that can work. And when you get a mind that's playful around that, then you've got a really extraordinary designer.
That's what's really interesting, is that a lot of the interview processes, not for design jobs, but for more like management consulting jobs, it's like, here's the problem, tell me what the answer is. And there's so much that's wrong with that on so many levels, and the fact that you feel like you need to ask those types of questions to people who've already done 2 degrees and are, there's so many issues embedded with that. If anybody asks you to do that, I've actually never done an interview where they've asked me to do these silly tests and what was the right answer, and then you go out and then you talk to the other person who's just come out and you're like, what did you say? I don't know. Oh no. That's not the sign of a healthy, of an organization that's really going to value the way you think. It's the way you think.
I'm just going to, because I didn't answer your question properly, you have to use your network and you have to get in front of people. Had I gone through the official process of getting the job at Accenture, I would never have got it. Like personality testing, 5 interviews. No, I knew someone in there who knew they needed someone like it. I know you're laughing, but it's true. I would have failed miserably, and I said it from the beginning, didn't I? You have to get in front. If you're designers and creatives, we are human by nature. We need to be in front of people, and we need to be able to tell our story. And you know whether you can or not. So you have to work your network. You have to build a network, and then you have to work it.
Okay, we've given a lot of tips. If you don't have a job, in 3 months, there's a lot of talk. Next question, Katya.
Thank you. So my question goes on from this a little bit, because I think I understand where this question's coming from. A lot of people who work in interaction design and user experience, we get told that we need to be unicorns all the time. We need to be good at everything. We need to be able to tell stories. We need to be able to design, visual design and infographic design. We need to be able to come up with interaction design. We need to be able to research. We need to be able to test. Oh, and don't forget coding. We all need to have to code as well. So this is what we hear from a lot of organisations. We hear it from a lot of recruiters who say you have to have all of these skills. But I actually think that specialism should be valued and specialism should be celebrated. So I'd be interested, because you did say you're looking for people who can be general and do a lot of things, but specialism I think is a really valid and important and celebratory thing, especially in our industry.
Yeah, no, people who wear several hats. That doesn't mean you're necessarily good at all of them. So we speak a lot about T-shaped people. Has anyone used that term? Is that good or bad?
It's pretty common.
T-shaped
bit academic.
T-shaped people have general skills at a superficial level in many areas and a great depth of expertise in one. So I think definitely it's not about being all things to all people. And in fact, at the beginning we spoke about design and the fact that we're not differentiating between the entrepreneurs, the risk takers, and the implementers. And I think that's the danger. I think to be all things is impossible. To know a few things about a bit of stuff, but to know your shit in one area. That's what it's about.
I think it depends what you want to be as well. I mean, leaders need to be more of a generalist. When I mentor and work with startups, we really look at the team of people and their specialists that come together as a group. I mean, so in the agency that I'm building, I have, you know, interactive designers, UX designers, service designers, business designers. I want the best in their field. And when I put them together in a room, then we have a you know, if you want, a generalist group of people with really deep... I am all for the specialist. I myself am a generalist, I think, maybe. But you know, I want the best UX grads that I can find as deep divers. I want the best UI. I want the best business designers. I want the best service designers. Because I think when I throw them all together, I've got the best team.
Yeah, I think that the companies that draw up those laundry lists of, like, you've got to do this, this and this, I mean, that's a surefire sign that they don't understand design. Because what they've done is they've basically probably gone to too many conferences and read a couple of business books and gone, well, it looks like we need to have these things because that's what the world's telling me I need.
I love him.
And well, it's because it's convention. It's silly. And I think the job of the individual is to actually, when they're going for a job, is to assess that company and go, are these people sane? Are they actually going to help me build my career as well? Because I know a lot of designers now, their worldview isn't what's happening in Sydney, what's happening in Australia. Their skills are transferable and desirable anywhere in the world. I've had a whole bunch of designers go to the US, to Apple and RGA and things, because their skill sets are perfectly transferable, and you get to work with some of the smartest people on some of the coolest projects. Now, so as an individual, and if you've got those skills and you're good, you should be looking at companies and going, no, you're not right for me. And you know, and I think what will happen is that those companies that lack those skills, there will be a brain drain from them. People will opt out, and people will go to the smart companies.
That's why we lose a lot of our talent.
Absolutely, but it's like, you know, there are Australian firms that are smart as well, and they're attracting the right sort of talent. But people are going to go, yep, this is a dumb company. I don't want to work at that one. And I want to work with other smart people who want to do great stuff, because I've had enough of spending my life doing crap work, or as David Maister used to say, shit for idiots. So he used to draw a graph of that. Work that I love with exciting people and shit work for idiots, and then you go, yep, I don't want those people, I want those, and that's cool. And so that's where talent goes. They find the right companies to work for, and you should opt out of the dumb ones.
Who else do we have? Yeah, Mark.
Yes, hi, Marcus Ford, QUT School of Design. There's been some really fresh perspectives on the panel. I want to ask you about the current situation of the design community in Australia and whether there actually is such a thing as a design community, because it occurs to me as a bit of an outsider, originally having studied computer science, that lots of the different design areas are very navel-gazing and speak on their own. So the architects with the architects, industrial design with industrial design, and so forth. And at the same time, when I speak to colleagues in the tertiary environment, they always come up with the excuse of saying, well, the Royal Institute is making us do this and that because our course is accredited. So to what extent do you believe that some of this is a self-fabricated problem where practitioners that hold the ranks in these design associations and accredit tertiary courses are actually still putting the foot down and saying, no, we have to actually teach architecture and not design thinking. And as a result, if you do want to learn about design thinking, you go to the business school and not the design department.
But that kind of stuff is, some of those professions are what they call protected professions, you know, and that happened over time. You know, you can't be a doctor because you've studied design thinking, right? So you have to know a certain amount of things to be. And there's a few. With that. There's a few professions that are like that. And art, you named architecture, and architecture is one of those, because the architect is liable for blah blah blah, you know, whatever happens to the building. So I get it to that extent. I do think you're right in the sense that there's not a lot of cross-pollination, and there's not a lot of thinking about how can you involve other types of creative industries in work that has a relationship with architecture. And it's quite interesting. I'm doing the Venice project at the moment, doing the pavilion next year at the Venice Biennale, and our approach is all about, let's get a fashion designer, let's get a writer, let's get all these people, and you know, architecture will be in the mix, but we don't need to be so deliberate about saying this is architecture, right? Architecture is the backdrop to life, really. So I suppose I don't think it comes from those organizations. I think that would be giving them a bit too much agency. You know, they're there to give points, but hopefully people gather in communities of interest outside of what's going to give them CPD points. I'm hoping, unless you're all here for CPD points. Oh my God, that would just kill me. So I do think that is missing. That is missing, and hopefully, you know, there was some interesting case studies. At UTS, there was a guy from the business faculty and a woman from the architecture faculty, and they got together and they did a really interesting program around rapid prototyping and crowdsourcing innovation, and that was super interesting, but it actually was going against the grain of everything, of all the ways that the university is set up to work. You know, who publishes what? Can I claim credit? Can you claim credit? You know, the organizations aren't nimble enough to do that. Sorry, I took that over, but I think that was okay. Okay, next question.
10 minutes left. Do you want to take one more question?
We have one or two more?
Definitely people can.
So I work with a design lead, and he's a perfectionist. My question is, do you think methodical thinking is beneficial or detrimental to design?
We had this conversation, didn't we? I think, I'm trying to think where we landed on it. So definitely there are designers who, you know, appropriate the process and absolutely hold that as their religion. And I need to take my brief, and then you need to go away and give me some space so that I can think about it. I might get out some design books, I might not. And then I'm going to sketch, and then I'm going to ponder, and then et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's definitely processes. We were speaking about lean process, and we were speaking about the value of, you know, grey hair is perhaps that it helps you arrive at your answer with stronger intuition. I think you've got to get to a point where you believe in your answer. And how you can get from the initial discussion about, you know, identifying the problem to your solution with intuition should be completely open. If you can land there, but still interrogate it and it holds true, you should not be bound by the process. If you need to go through the process to get there, then so be it. And I think experience has a factor in that. I think where you've got to get to is having belief in your solution, and a part of belief in your solution is absolutely about having interrogated the hell out of it, knowing it's going to stand up, so that you never look like an idiot where somebody starts poking holes in your solution. But I think, you know, the ability to collaborate with other people will get you there a hell of a lot faster. The ability to be open to conversation and input and feedback will get you there a hell of a lot faster. So I think there's definitely different ways, and I think different people should have their process. I don't think there is one right way. And I think if you're meeting somebody who's hanging on to the process too tightly, worry that they haven't got the confidence to arrive at their solution themselves.
It comes back to not being either or. You've got to be both. You know, I'm the opposite. My brain was mad, and I had to learn some methods to bring, you know, so I was the opposite. And I really do think that the bilateral thinker, that person that can be methodical and mad at the same time and learn from both, I think that's where the magic is.
Yeah. It's not fun working under somebody who's a
Sorry. No.
Yeah.
No, it's not.
There are lots of different styles that designers can take on. I kind of worked out earlier on, there's a type of designer I like working with. And so I make sure.
What's that, Damian?
Because I guess I kind of the kind of designer I don't like working with is one that they spend a lot of time sort of doing whatever they do, and then you ask them about how they arrived at that, and they can't articulate it.
Yeah.
So I have no time for that process, and the work should speak for itself. Bullshit. It's like, you have to be able to talk to the client about how you arrived at this, because you know what? Your client is typically not literate in what you're doing. And so you have to provide the translation service. Now, if you can't translate, you're relying on a poorly equipped client to actually work out what your answer is. And so I have a much better time working with designers who are highly articulate. So their verbal skills are as good as their other aesthetic skills, and they're the guys that I love working with. And so just so that my client can have a good time of it, I can have a good time, and everybody else can work well together, that's the kind of person that I look for. in terms of one specific skill that a designer should have. And so, that means I don't get as much grey hair when I'm having to work on projects, which is a good thing.
Can I come back, that point about perfectionism, is it a belief you share in? The ambition that you're being tasked to deliver against?
As a designer, I mean, obviously I get paid and there's some timing issues. So I always think about the business goals and the times, and I apply that to my process.
Yeah, because I think there's two parts to that. Do you share the belief? And if it's your belief as well, then it doesn't feel like such hard work.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
If you
share the belief?
If you share the belief and you are working for the same goal, it doesn't feel like such hard work. It's not about this constant desire to craft and polish if you're invested in the outcome as well, is one part. But I think there's also a part for commercial pragmatism. I can't even say the word, so clearly that's not a driver for me. But I think there is definitely a point where I often liken this to standing at the gate of school and you're letting your brand go and you're signing it off and you're hoping it's going to come back to you at the end of the day in some semblance of the way you left it. I think there's a point at which you have to let go. And I think having the wisdom to know when that moment is 9/10 of a great design solution.
Yeah.
Not overthinking it.
Perfectionism is a form of procrastination. And because it's, and particularly like one thing I find with people who haven't had a lot of experience as a designer, they will explore the options, and you're going, we've got a meeting deadline here and I haven't seen an outcome yet, because it requires extraordinary courage to commit to an idea. And then to back yourself to do that.
That's what strategy is.
And that's absolutely. So it's exactly the same with strategists.
Commercialism here.
Yeah, and
they can exist separately.
Yeah, and so what usually people do is that they find any excuse except the commitment bit, and that's very common in people who are early out in their careers. And you sort of get to know after a while that you have to shut things down and actually commit to something and work deep and hard into it, so that you can actually back yourself when you're in front of a client. And less experienced people don't have that skill, and that's probably one of the things that I have to be constantly mindful of in terms of going, okay, you've got to stop now let's build on that, rather than let's explore over here and here and here, and you lose money and time and everything.
Okay, one final
more
question.
here, at the front.
Here, final question.
Hi,
Just had the microphone.
I'm tense, ready to go. Having worked both client side and agency side into clients and delivered projects to the client where you just don't really see what you design delivered in the end, it looks very different. And now working client side and trying to do that sort of from the inside out. I'm really interested from your perspective over the years that you've been in the industry. Are there any businesses in Australia who you've potentially delivered design into, or concepts or strategy or anything into, that have taken that on board and really adopted it and become amazing businesses that have design at their centre? Because I think that, we've talked a lot about where we want to work and what we're looking for in people to work, both agency side and client side. But are there businesses out there that, young designers should be saying, that's where I want to work, that's where I want to go, because they're doing it really well and they've adopted that sort of user-centred design approach, whether that's architecture or anything, to their business and adopted it and really running with it?
Interesting. I think it's a great question. I think if things are working, if you're seeing a business where it's working, is there a problem is there such a challenge? I think that it's back to that leap of faith thing. It's back to the business that has a broken situation that wants to be fixed. And I think for me personally, I can only speak for myself, I think it's that partnership where you can really influence. Because at some point you've got to stop telling, right? At some point your client has to have that piece themselves and start to own it. And for me, that moment where that tipping point where they're taking the lead on things is just, that's what success looks like. But I wouldn't say it's about finding, personally, I think I'm looking for the broken pieces. I'm looking for the problems to be fixed. So I don't know, that I would say if I was looking for a company that I wanted to work with, and I guess we're talking now as opposed to a client as opposed to internally. A client, I think I'm looking for, fixes that I can add value around. I've also been client-side. I think client-side is very much more about the influence piece. Maybe that's where I've got my desire to influence and collaborate from, because you don't go in there and tell, you bring people with you. And I think the moment where they're beginning to really... I've seen big changes happen inside business just from gentle persistence. It's a different style client side, absolutely. But as an agency, I'm looking for problems that need to be fixed, and I think I'd be looking for ability to adapt if I was to go in-house.
I think if you're starting out, though, focus less on the company and focus on the people that you're going to be with.
Yeah.
I would strongly, and I do a lot of mentoring with, She Says and other, young women in arts and media, and I tell them to follow people you like. I think that if you're with the right leader, you can do anything. And I have sold everything from cars to tampons to houses in my advertising career. So I'm not sure that the sector is as important as being with people who, if you are with design. So, for example, Roy Green, the Dean of UTS Business School, I would follow him anywhere. I've worked with him in 2 business schools because I truly believe in him, and I knew that he believed in me. And that's what allowed us to have the impact and the transformation at UTS Business School. The Gary building, new business programs. That magic between our team of collaborators. I'm not academic. I have no interest in an MBA, but here I was transforming MBA programs for the likes of whoever. I really think finding like-minded people that you aspire to, I think that's, particularly as you're stepping out, I think that's the key.
That's a wonderful, positive note. Sorry, I'm mindful of time. We've got to be out in less than a minute. So I want to thank you all so much for coming tonight, and please thank our panelists.